First, I would throw in this caveat to think about in terms of cognition and when their world kind of crashes. Um, if the view's been put forth by what we would call a charismatic leader, in which the hopes and expectations are also very interwoven with that person. This would be like David Koresh. But that can make a difference. So if you go back to Miller, Miller was a Baptist preacher. He was a farmer. I read quite a bit about him when I did the book Why Waco. I have a whole section. And he took a Cruden's Concordance. Any of you remember Cruden's Concordance? And it's in English. So it's kind of a bad way to study the Bible because you're just looking up King James words when the Greek and Hebrew is different. Before people got Strongs and Youngs and all that. Many of you have been through those things. And he said, I'm going to start in Genesis 1:1, and I'm going to read every verse on every major word. So I won't do ands and buts, and I don't even think he did the word God because there's several. But he's a Baptist preacher. But people weren't accepting this view that he had of 1843 and then 1844. So much because of him, but he had followers that spread the word. It actually was a kind of calculation he came up with, where he approached it from three different angles using the book of Revelation and the book of Daniel. Too complicated to go into. But he was able to say, oh, look, you come out to 1843, and oh, look, you know, whether it's the 1290 days, the 1335, these are numbers in the latter part of Daniel. So there was that aspect where you say, well, that can't be wrong then because I did the numbers. And from the time of this to this will be this, the Bible says that it's true. So what happened in particular in Miller's case was a woman who followed him, Ellen G. White, was very troubled. She was devastated by this great disappointment. By the way, the story is people went to mountaintops, people had ascension robes. I checked into that. That's actually true because I didn't want to just spread, I've always heard that. And other people were just watching. But it was more the calculations that were convincing people. You follow? Sort of like Hal Lindsey. If you read Hal Lindsey, you buy into his system. If Hal Lindsey became a Muslim tomorrow, you wouldn't go, oh, well, then it can't be true. You go, no, well, what he said, I read it in the book of Revelation. I read it here, I read it there. I've proven it. The Antichrist and Europe and 10 nations will arise and so forth. So keep that in mind because a Jim Jones and a David Koresh are not the same as a William Miller. So there's some power in the calculations of the text itself or themselves, actually, as they say, do the numbers. You do the numbers and you go, wow, this is amazing. Look how this comes out. So for example, I'll wow you with one, okay? Daniel chapter 8 talks about 2,300 days, actually literally mornings and evenings, from the time that Persia is defeated by a king of Greece, and then the sanctuary will be vindicated. Alexander defeated Darius. I think he came up with like 334 BCE, and he went ahead 2,300 years, and it comes out to 1967. And then he said, and I think it was in June when Darius was defeated. Oh my God, 1967, June. So there you go to the day. Well, what's the problem with that? Well, the point I'm making is that it doesn't matter whether Hal Lindsey becomes an apostate or gives it up or takes somebody's wife or whatever. Whereas if you're following a leader, what the leader does can also be just as significant as the predictions. And then you kind of trust the leaders being guided. So we even find that in the Dead Sea Scrolls where the leader said something, but then the group is thinking, well, maybe it's this or that. So what did Ellen G. White do? She took a typical strategy of letting the prophecy still be true And that would be these calculations of Miller for 1843. And then the next, he went to the next year, 1844. You know why? Because you got to add a year when you go from BC to AD and so forth, and somebody hadn't figured out how to do that because there's no year zero. So it was off a year. But Ellen G. White said, oh, well, he wasn't really wrong. This is strategy number one. You think we were wrong, but we actually weren't wrong. The date was right. So you don't even reset the date. The date was right, but the event was not what we expected. It's not the visible coming of Jesus. It's Jesus leaving the sanctuary in heaven where he's been atoning for sin for the past, 1800 and something years at that point. 1800 years, just about, exactly. And now he's come out of there and he's in the vestibule, so to speak. He's left the temple. He was atoning all those years in the Holy of Holies in heaven. And now he's come out. So we don't know when he's going to come now, but I mean, he did come out on that date. Well, that works for what? 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, 150? Keep going, because Adventists are doing just fine. In fact, they're growing, right, all over the world, because they learned how you can redefine what was supposed to happen. So you can redo the date, you can redefine what's supposed to happen. That's the most common. Russell did that. You heard of Russell, who Rutherford started the Jehovah's Witnesses, but Russell, he came up with 1914 with different calculations. And then he said, well, he wrote a book called Millions Now Living Will Never Die, which is that's kind of scary to say that, right? Because he means you're definitely the end time generation. But when it didn't happen, he said, well, the presence is here invisibly and did come. And I think he had a date as well. It did come. Now, for a lot of people, that doesn't cause any cognitive dissonance. They just go like, oh, well, why did I fall for that? I mean, if you read Hal Lindsey now, I have my students read it. It just doesn't, I mean, Europe is our greatest ally. I guess it could change, but it doesn't seem like it. The Western democracies are, so you need a new beast. Maybe it could be the Soviet Union now. Or what about a Muslim beast? An Arab. I mean, isn't that the real enemy in the Bible? Would be, these countries around Israel. Do you know the name Darby? Any of you? Darby? John Darby? Some of you do. If you just know Hal Lindsey, Darby is the one behind, he was part of the Church of, I think, the Brethren, right? Plymouth Brethren? Developed this idea of a double coming. So now it's foolproof. And you don't have to set dates or watch for any signs at all. Jesus, Billy Graham's right. Christ could come tonight. Remember that? You go to Billy Graham, he could come tonight. And so you need to come forward, accept Christ. And you go, well, wait, how could he come tonight? Because this stuff hasn't happened yet. Like the mark of the beast and all nations under certain power. Oh, that will be after he comes. So you get this invisible coming. As Hagee loves to put it, he didn't originate this, but he's the most vocal advocate right now. The first coming is when Jesus comes for his saints. And the second coming is when he comes with his saints. So he's going to take them up to heaven, the rapture, and so forth. Well, now prophecy kind of is out there, irrefutable, you see. So Hal Lindsey was a dispensationalist. So he really can't be that wrong because, first of all, the rapture hasn't taken place. So I'm just trying to complicate it. So you got your charismatic leader and you're not going to give it up because, this person was truly a prophet, like a David Koresh. That is particularly what Fessinger tapped into, because if I give this up, it's like my whole world will crash. And I know it can't be wrong because I had such an assurance, by my own religious experience that this person is it. But a Millerite could have just been somebody that heard Miller's scheme, saw the charts, and thought, "What? Isn't that amazing? I think that makes sense. That's going to happen." But they're not invested in it as a group. And another thing I wrote down is this is actually the smartest thing to do, I think, is just say God has extended the time beyond anything written. I'll give you the best example I know of this. Some of you are in my Dead Sea Scrolls class, quite a few of you. And what happens when the teacher dies? The teacher of righteousness, as he was called. In 40 years, all the men of darkness will be cut off, and the righteous will triumph, and the sons of light. And the final battle with the Kittim, the Romans, will take place in 40 years. Well, actually, the Romans came in. They did just fine. They didn't get defeated by anybody. Remember Pompey in 63? And then when Augustus becomes ruler, he even appoints a king, Herod the Great, king of the Jews, who's not, only Jewish. Mother was Arabian, his father a convert Idumean. And so all of a sudden it's like that. Talk about cognitive dissonance. I mean, nothing's happening. So what do you do? So what they did is there's a favorite verse of apocalypticists that have failed. I can't believe it's there, but Habakkuk chapter 2. If the vision tarries, wait for it. It will surely come. The just one, the righteous one, will live by faith. That's the original meaning of that verse that Paul's so fond of, justified by faith. It's not really talking about your sins being forgiven. It's talking about don't give up on your faith, even if the vision fails, because it didn't fail. We might say, as some men count failure. And that's finally what the rabbis wisely said. You can get the Talmud online at Sefaria, the website, and put in Sanhedrin 98. You'll love reading it. It's wonderful. And the rabbis are going to, when is the Messiah coming? We thought it was going to be in the Second Temple period, and now this and that. And finally they go, all bets are off. There will be no predicting of the future again. God has prolonged the time, and it will come whenever he decides. So the dispensationalists, without giving anything up in terms of their scenario, what's going to happen in the quote, I call it the second coming. I guess it's the third coming, really. They basically have kind of saved themselves by expecting at any time, and then all this stuff will happen. So you can't falsify it.